A single dad's blind date was an older CEO. Then he realized who she really was. Daniel Reyes had exactly 40 minutes to become a man worth loving again, and he was going to spend 38 of them standing in his daughter's bedroom doorway, listening to her cry into a pillow because he'd forgotten, for the third time that month, that Tuesday was pajama day at school, and he'd washed the only pair she owned. This was not how he had imagined his life at 34. He had imagined boardrooms, promotions, a wife who still looked at him the way she used to. Instead, he had a 6-year-old named Mia who flinched a little every time the doorbell rang, because doorbells in her small world usually meant someone was leaving. If you believe two broken people can still find something worth building, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight. And subscribe, because this story is about to show you that the family you're looking for might already be looking for you too. 3 years earlier, Daniel's wife had walked out on a Tuesday morning with 2 suitcases and a note that said she was sorry, but she hadn't signed up to be somebody's mother before she'd figured out how to be somebody's wife. Mia was 3. She didn't remember her mother's face without help from photographs, and Daniel had spent every night since then trying to be enough for a child who deserved 2 parents and had ended up with one exhausted father who worked construction estimates by day and folded tiny t-shirts by night. He hadn't dated, he hadn't wanted to. Love, in his experience, was something that left, and he wasn't interested in giving it another opportunity to prove him right. His sister Carla disagreed, loudly and often, and on a rainy Thursday in October she informed him that she had signed him up for a blind date whether he liked it or not, because a man who spent his Friday nights watching cartoons with a first grader was a man who needed, in her words, a little bit of adult conversation before his soul turns into oatmeal. Daniel laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks and told her he'd think about it, which was his way of saying no. But Carla was not a woman who accepted maybes, and by Saturday she had already arranged a babysitter, ironed his one good shirt, and shoved a reservation card into his hand for a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind with candles that made everyone look 10 years younger and 10 times more nervous. He almost didn't go. He stood in his kitchen at 6:15, staring at his own reflection in the dark window above the sink, wondering what kind of woman would agree to be set up with a broke single father who hadn't been on a date since dial-up internet was still a thing. But Mia, sitting at the table coloring a picture of what she called a mommy dragon, looked up at him and said, without any drama at all, that he should go have fun, and something about hearing that sentence from his own daughter cracked him open just enough to grab his keys. The restaurant was warm and low-lit, filled with the quiet clink of wine glasses and the murmur of people who had nowhere else they needed to be. Daniel sat at a corner table twisting his napkin into knots, rehearsing small talk he already knew he'd fumble, when a woman walked in wearing a charcoal blazer that looked like it cost more than his truck, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a way that somehow made her look both commanding and kind at the same time. She scanned the room once, found him, and smiled. Not a nervous first date smile, but the calm, steady smile of someone who had walked into 100 rooms and never once doubted she belonged in them. Her name was Eleanor Voss, and within the first 5 minutes Daniel understood 2 things. She was at least 15 years older than him, and she was, without question, the most self-possessed person he had ever shared a table with. She asked about Mia before she asked about him, which caught him off guard, and when he mentioned, half apologizing, that he probably talked about his daughter too much for a first date, Eleanor set down her wine glass and told him that a man who couldn't stop talking about his child was exactly the kind of man worth having dinner with. Something in Daniel's chest loosened for the first time in years. They talked for 2 hours. She told him she'd built something from nothing, that she'd started with a small workshop and grown it into a company most people in the city would recognize by name, though she never actually said the name, brushing past it the way people do when a subject feels too heavy to hold at dinner. He told her about the divorce, about Mia's nightmares, about the guilt that sat behind his ribs like a stone every single day, The fear that no matter how hard he tried, he would always be the reason his daughter grew up believing love was something that packed a suitcase and left. Eleanor listened the way almost no one had listened to him in years, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually hearing him, her eyes steady and warm. And when he finished, she reached across the table and told him that the fact he was still afraid of failing his daughter was proof he never would. He drove home that night with the windows cracked, cold air rushing over his face, feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope, thin and fragile, but real. He didn't call the next day, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how a man like him kept a woman like her interested past one good dinner. It was Eleanor who called first, 4 days later, asking if he and Mia might like to come to a small charity carnival her company was sponsoring that weekend. Low-key, she promised, nothing fancy, just games and cotton candy and a Ferris wheel that barely qualified as tall. Mia fell in love with her before Daniel allowed himself to. Eleanor crouched down to Mia's eye level in the middle of a crowded fairground, ignored 3 separate people who tried to pull her aside for business conversations, and spent 45 minutes helping a 6-year-old win a stuffed elephant at a ring toss booth, cheering louder than anyone else in line when Mia finally landed the ring. Daniel stood a few feet back, watching the woman he barely knew kneel in the dirt in a blazer that cost more than his monthly rent, laughing with his daughter like the rest of the world had simply stopped existing, and he felt something shift permanently inside his chest. It was later that same afternoon, while Mia napped in the back of his truck and Eleanor walked him toward the parking lot, that he saw it, a banner strung across the entrance of the very building the carnival had been held in, the headquarters of Voss Industries, the name stitched into the fabric in gold thread, and beneath it, smaller but unmistakable, a plaque with Eleanor's full name and title, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Daniel stopped walking. He'd known she ran something. He hadn't understood until that exact moment, standing in a gravel parking lot with cotton candy still sticky on his knuckles, that the woman who had spent her Saturday afternoon helping his daughter win a stuffed animal controlled a company that employed over 4,000 people. A company whose commercials he had watched on television his entire adult life without ever once connecting the name to the woman in front of him. He felt something close to panic. Not because she had money, he didn't care about money, had never cared about money, but because he suddenly understood the gap between them in a way he hadn't let himself see before. What did he have to offer a woman who ran an empire? A used truck with a check engine light that never turned off, a rented duplex with a leaky faucet, a daughter who still needed him to check under the bed for monsters every single night. He mumbled something about needing to get Mia home, and Eleanor, watching his face change, didn't chase him. She simply told him to call her if he wanted to, and let him go. He didn't call for 11 days. He told himself he was protecting Mia from getting attached to someone who would eventually realize a broke construction estimator wasn't worth her time. He told himself he was protecting himself too from falling for a woman who lived in a world he could never fully belong to. But Mia asked about her constantly, asked if the elephant lady was coming back, asked if she could call her Miss Eleanor, drew pictures of the 3 of them standing beside a Ferris wheel, and every question landed on Daniel like a small, precise blow, because he realized he was doing to his daughter exactly what his ex-wife had once done to him. Building something up, and then quietly, cowardly, letting it go. On the 12th night, he sat on his porch steps with his phone in his hand for almost an hour before he finally called her. Eleanor picked up on the second ring, and before he could deliver the apology he'd been rehearsing, she told him, gently, that she had wondered if the plaque had scared him off, and that she understood because it had scared off more than one person before him. She told him that she had grown up with nothing, that she had built her company out of a garage with her father's old tools after he passed away, with nothing left to give her but his name and his work ethic, and that every single day she still felt like the girl from that garage playing dress-up in a corner office. She told him that money had never once made her feel less alone, and that the afternoon at the carnival, kneeling in the dirt with his daughter, had been the first time in years she'd felt like herself instead of a title on a door. Daniel sat on his porch steps and cried quietly into the phone. the kind of crying he hadn't let himself do since his divorce. And Eleanor stayed on the line the entire time, not rushing him, not fixing him, just staying. They started slow after that. Sunday dinners that became a habit, then a ritual. Eleanor learned that Mia hated peas but loved anything shaped like a dinosaur. Learned the exact way Daniel liked his coffee. Learned to knock twice before entering a room because sudden noises still made Mia jump sometimes. A small leftover wound from a childhood that had already lost one parent to a slammed door. Daniel learned that Eleanor's confidence in boardrooms hid a woman who still, 20 years after her father's death, kept his old work gloves in the top drawer of her desk, who had spent decades being told she was too much and too old and too intimidating, who had built walls so high that almost no one had bothered to knock in years, until a nervous single father with a stuffed elephant obsession and a little girl with a gap-toothed smile had walked straight through them without even trying. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening 7 months later, an ordinary evening that somehow became one Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. Mia had a school project due, a family tree, the kind of assignment teachers hand out without thinking about how many different shapes a family can take. And she sat at the kitchen table with her colored pencils, chewing her lip, staring at a nearly empty page. Daniel watched her from the stove, his heart aching in that old familiar place, until Eleanor, who had come over for dinner, quietly pulled out the chair beside Mia and asked if she could help. Mia looked up at her, hesitated for exactly 1 second, and then, in the voice of a child who has decided something important, asked if she could draw Eleanor on the branch where a mom usually goes. Daniel had to turn around and pretend to check something in the oven so his daughter wouldn't see him fall apart at the stove. Eleanor didn't say yes right away. She asked Mia if she was sure, told her that kind of branch was a big one, that it meant something serious. Mia nodded without a single doubt in her small face. And Eleanor, this woman who ran boardrooms and built empires and had spent a lifetime being underestimated and overworked, sat at a scratched kitchen table with a box of crayons and let a 6-year-old draw her into the center of a family that had been broken and was, quietly, one crayon stroke at a time, becoming whole again. If this story touched something in you tonight, if you believe that love doesn't care about your title, your bank account, or how many years separate two people who are meant to find each other, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear that broken families can still become beautiful ones. It means more than you know, and it helps this story reach the people who need it most. Daniel and Eleanor married the following spring in a small backyard ceremony with folding chairs and string lights instead of a ballroom because Eleanor told him she'd spent enough of her life in rooms that echoed and wanted, for once, a wedding that felt like a home. Mia walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with the seriousness of a girl handling the most important job in the world, wearing a small gold necklace Eleanor had given her that morning, a single charm shaped like an elephant. Before the ceremony began, Eleanor knelt down in her wedding dress, the same way she had once knelt in the dirt of a carnival, and told Mia that she wasn't trying to replace anybody, that she simply wanted to spend the rest of her life making sure Mia never doubted, for even one single day, that she was deeply and completely loved. Mia wrapped her small arms around Eleanor's neck and whispered that she already knew. Before we close this story tonight, I want to ask something a little different from the usual. I want you to comment the word family below if you believe that the family we build is just as real, just as sacred as the one we're born into. I read every single one, and I'd love to know how many of you out there believe, the way Daniel finally learned to, that it's never too late for love to walk through your door. Years later, when people asked Eleanor Voss how the CEO of one of the fastest growing companies in the state had ended up married to a single father she'd met on a blind date arranged by his sister, she would smile the same steady smile she'd worn the night they met, and tell them that titles had never once made her feel like she belonged anywhere but a little girl asking to draw her on a family tree had. And Daniel, standing beside her, would simply say that he had walked into that restaurant expecting nothing and had walked out, eventually, with everything. Some doors, it turns out, are worth knocking on twice. And some families aren't found, they're built. One small, brave, ordinary moment at a time.